I'm a big advocate of the concept of parliamentary supremacy, which means garbage in, garbage out. And if we Canadians are so reckless and so irresponsible that we're voting in these lunatics that are pushing through these lunatic bills, we can't then turn around and fault the courts when they don't fix the mess that we helped create.
I am a husband, a father, a lawyer, a Christian, and a proud Canadian. I started this series because it was clear that our nation needs truth. Not just another biased narrative, but real information of substance. We need access to facts and the freedom to think for ourselves. I'm Leighton Grey, and this is Grey Matter.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Grey Matter. Well, those of you who follow my movements around social media and the internet closely, not that you should, will be aware that I've had several really great conversations with today's guests. I would describe him as one of the most brilliant minds in Canadian podcasting today. He's almost too smart to be a podcaster, and he's also an aspiring politician. And I've been looking forward to this conversation for some time because he's been good enough to have me on his show. His name is Peyman Askari. Welcome to the program, Peyman.
Hello, Leighton. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So before we dive in, and I tell people all about your background, as we always do, we have our framing aphorisms. Some of these have been selected in your honor. So you say you're not easily offended, so I'm going to test that right here. The first one is from someone we've talked about during our conversations, Dr. Thomas Sowell, who says, one of the sad signs of our times is that we have demonized those who produce, subsidized those who refuse to produce, and canonized those who complain. The next one is from Sir Roger Scruton, the late Sir Roger Scruton, who wrote that every practical application of Marxist theory has led not merely to tyranny, but to social and economic collapse. And I wish that our Prime Minister would tape that one to his mirror. The next one is from Friedrich Hayek, who we know Mr. Bernie is a great fan of. I expect you might be as well. Who wrote, perhaps the fact that we have seen millions voting themselves into complete dependence on a tyrant has made our generation understand that to choose one's government is not necessarily to secure freedom. It's strange. He was obviously talking about someone named Hitler, but it's strange how applicable that seems to be to Canada. We've elected Justin Trudeau. Well, we elected him 3 times in 6 years. It's hard to believe, but we did it. So who do we have on the show today? Well, Peyman is a proud Canadian who believes that at some point every citizen must stop demanding more from their country and must instead begin giving something back. He's a strong supporter of individual rights, limited government, and the rule of law. He was born in Iran and came to Canada when he was only 6 years old. He grew up in West Vancouver and then earned his bachelor's in computer science from York University in 2006. Later, he obtained his PhD in computational neuroscience from Southampton University in 2010. Upon completing his education, he started work in the tech space, then moved to sales, business development, and finally, he decided to start his own company about 10 years ago. Throughout his career, he's had a passion for taking complex projects and simplifying them for the end customer. And I would say his podcast does that too. He brings this same level of passion and enthusiasm to the political arena and is singularly focused on simplifying political issues and esoteric language for the general population. And when he decided to run for public office with the PPC, he made the decision to simultaneously launch a podcast which is dedicated to simplifying the convoluted political landscape. On his show, he brings on average rank and file Canadians like me who share their experiences with government overregulation. He then packages those experiences for the Canadian public in a nice, neat product. And that show is called In Lay Terms. You really should check it out. It's one of the best things on the internet. I watch it regularly, especially when I'm not on it. So, I want to first of all get your take. There's something very hot that has been going on in the last little while. Mr. Poilievre, the leader of the official opposition in Parliament, has gotten in trouble for calling the Prime Minister a wacko. Most sane people in this country would rather agree and wave their pom-poms over that. And I seem to recall Mr. Trudeau calling somebody a piece of a word I won't say on here, in Parliament in 2011 when he was a rookie. What's your take on this? Is this much ado about nothing? And what's your take generally on the CPC and their recent rise in the polls?
Uh, well, I have a lot of opinions on that. So first of all, every single time the liberals do something like this, they basically hand a win to the Conservative Party, which is, it's good for the Conservative Party. I got nothing against them. The other thing is, I'm trying to, I call it taking the temperature down. So we've got into this habit where you pick a side and you scream at the other side.
Mm.
So what I did when I heard about this incident in the Parliament, I said, okay, is there any precedent for this? Like, has anyone else ever previously been, I don't know, censored or kicked out by the speaker for using aggressive language, caustic language? Um, if it's happened before, then okay, fine. Mr. Polyev shouldn't have done it. But obviously there is a bias, and the one that came to mind was Yara Sachs. So I don't know if you remember, she got up in
Mm-hmm.
Parliament. She said, "Honk honk is the new Heil Hitler." Like
Yes.
that's very aggressive. That's a
Mm-hmm.
disgusting thing to say. It's incredibly stupid. But like, I don't recall her getting kicked out. So what's happening is, there's obviously a bias. You know it. I know it. It's a left-leaning liberal bias because they're in power and they don't want to give up power. So it's happening. But if I guess what I'm trying to say is, we can't just shout at the other side and call them leftists or call them
Mm-hmm.
liberals or communists. We kind of have to take a cooler heads will prevail approach to this and say, all right, guys, let's acknowledge that there's a bias. The speaker is biased. Let's stop respecting him and let's chart a path forward to reclaim our legislature, which is what I'm trying to do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's more in line with the basic platform of the PPC, isn't it? To bring some sanity back to politics, to get away from this sort of these entrenched positions, left, right, which really isn't truly part of the Canadian culture and politics, is it?
I guess it's not. In full disclosure, I was not really involved in politics, so my understanding of Canadian politics starts in December of 2020. Nothing existed for me before that. But with respect to the PPC, they are like, the best way I can describe it is a common sense party. So
Mm-hmm,
you cherry pick what you like from the left, and we are in certain ways a labor movement. We support labor in the middle class. Pick some stuff from the right, like you can't have unfettered immigration. That's not to
mm-hmm,
say that immigrants are evil or vile or we should detest them, but you just can't have this much. And
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
then you take some from the middle too. There's some libertarian arguments like limited government. That's what the PPC is. But if you listen to the CBC, the PPC is this far right Nazi organization that wants to, I don't know, throw all homosexuals in jail and enslave everyone. So there's a disconnect there.
Oh, it's strange. The CBC seem to be the only ones who don't realize that the Nazis were actually a leftist party. They actually put socialism right in the name. But speaking of immigration, this is something I wanted to raise with you. You came to Canada as a young boy, about age 6, I think. I'm curious to know, coming over at that time with your family, what were your first impressions of Canada, and what did you come to love and cherish about Canada that's made you want to be a member of Parliament?
I'll tell you the story from soup to nuts. I'll try not to get emotional. But so in
You can
Iran, there
get
was
as emotional as you want. You're allowed to cry on this show.
you can edit it out, yeah, in post. So in Iran, there was there was the longest conventional war of the 20th century. I think 1980 to 1988.
Hmm.
So my parents had enough. I think a rocket hit the airport. We were supposed to fly out, and they're like, "Screw this!" So we get in the car. We drive to Turkey. Via Turkey, we caught a plane to Germany. My dad had a visa. He used to work with
Wow.
the Germans. Um, Now, I support sovereign nations' right to do whatever they want, and if they don't want immigrants, I think that's a right. People don't like to hear that, but that is. Unfortunately, if you're an immigrant and you're stuck in that environment, it's really bad. So Germany was really, it wasn't a good place. Like they didn't want us there. Again, that's their right. If they don't want you there, that's fine. but for us it was horrible. So we were there for 1 year, and then we made our way to Ottawa. And like the Canadians were just so they were so different from the Germans. Like I remember as soon as we got there, a contingent of, I don't know what they're called, Ottawans. They got my mom and they showed her around the city, and they were encouraging her, teaching her how to speak English. So it's night and day. And I guess what really angered me and it made my blood boil when this whole trucker convoy thing happened and COVID fiasco, um, and the Kamloops, the Graves, what do you call it? Residential school,
The hoax.
hoax. Yeah, that hoax when they said Canadians are bad people. I'm like, I'm looking at a picture I have of my mom with these 2-3 women from Ottawa, contrasting that with Germany, and these people are saying that Canadians are bad. That offends me. My lawyer is Canadian, my doctor is Canadian, my accountant's Canadian, my best friends are Canadian, and it's just I was like, this is unsustainable. So that's my view on immigration in Canada. I promised I wouldn't get emotional, but I did.
Your story reminds me of Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who we had on the program, and he emigrated to Canada to the United States, to California from India when he was about the same age that you were, and he told this wonderful story on the program of when his father, who had come ahead of them, greeted them at the airport, and his father produced a chocolate bar. And Jay Bhattacharya thought this was just the greatest thing ever. It was just became a symbol of America for him, and that moment, that tangible moment, sort of symbolized by the metaphor of a candy bar, never left him. And he's had an abiding love of America and freedom, everything it represents, for a long time. One other thing I wanted to ask you about Iran, which intrigues me. We had a brilliant young lawyer who worked for us who was from Iran. He's in Calgary right now. He's doing very well. His name is Aydin Sadeghi. Maybe he's listening. But he regarded himself as a Persian, and he's very, very devout Christian. And I'm curious, can you explain, because those of us in the West, we think of Iran, in terms of the Ayatollah, as very Muslim, very militant Muslim country. But actually, there's a very strong Christian contingent in that country, isn't there?
There might be, but let me start from a historical perspective. So Iran, the area we call Iran, was like the arch enemy of the Roman Empire, whereas the Roman Empire was centralized. Iran was more like a feudal structure, and at the time it was called Persia. So in our country, in our language, we say Fars. The people are Fars, and then it got translated. It's called Persian. There was an emperor, I believe it was Darius, who said, like, my bloodline is pure, going back thousands of years, and I guess the word for pure back then was Aryan, not the German Nazi. That's a different thing. So he said, I'm Arya. And then when the Shah of Iran came in 79, and I guess he wanted to centralize power by doing what Mussolini did, was to encourage, romanticize with the past. He said, let's change the name from Persia to Iran, which is why now we're Iranian. To get back to your question about Christianity, way back when, Iran was a pagan culture. I can never pronounce the name of the religion. I think it's Zoroastrianism or something. It's the worst name ever. But they were fire worshippers, and they did some weird things. Like if you died, they didn't bury you; they left you out for the vultures. It's something about not contaminating the earth. So that culture kind of stuck with the Iranians. And when the Muslims came in 79, they tried to get rid of our New Year, which is a pagan New Year pegged to the spring. And I guess I don't even know what the Muslim New Year is, but they tried to do that, and they realized they just couldn't. Like Iranians, they did get conquered by the Arabs, and we had to give up our religion and take on Islam. And truth be told, it isn't a Muslim nation now, but they never gave up their language, they never gave up their culture. So we're stuck between these two different worlds.
Fascinating.
And it wouldn't surprise me if there's a big Christian contingency. There are some Jews, there are some Baha'is, Kurds. The country is a hodgepodge of different cultures. It's like, imagine Quebec to the power of 25.
So what was the impetus for your family to leave? What made your parents decide that Iran, their natural home for presumably for generations, was not the place where they wanted to raise you and to raise their family?
Excellent question. And if anyone's watching who's in the freedom movement, who keeps saying like Canadians, shaming Canadians that are trying to leave the country, telling them they should stay and fight, listen to this. When your country fails, nobody nobody guilts you for leaving. And
Mm-hmm.
any Iranian after the revolution that could leave, they picked up and left. And
Mm-hmm.
when they talked to the ones that were stuck in Iran, they didn't hate you for leaving. They said, I'm so glad that you left. So when the revolution happened and when they went crazy, like things got out of control. So I'll give you one extreme example. When they took women, young girls, I don't know, 13, 14, and they were going to execute them, they somehow contorted what it says in the Quran, where like a girl can't be a virgin if she goes to, she can't get into heaven if she's a virgin when she dies. So they essentially they raped these girls in custody, and they justified themselves in doing so based on these things. So it was out of control. Then the Iran-Iraq War, 1 million dead on each side. I remember seeing the conscripts lining up to go to war, like they knew they weren't coming back. So anyone that could, they packed up and left. And that will happen in Canada. If things continue like this, people will leave, and patriotism be damned.
Mm-hmm. That's a very, very interesting take, and I hope people were listening carefully to that, because there's so much to lose and even more to win by supporting freedom and the things that made Canada the kind of country that your parents wanted to bring you to many years ago. So, talk about Iran again. I want to get your take on this. Obviously, you have a unique perspective on this. Iran has engaged fully in this Gaza conflict that started last October between the state of Israel and Hamas. What's your take on that? And not asking you to pick a side, but geopolitically, what's your insight into what's going on there? Why is Iran getting involved on the side of Hamas? Is it just that they have a hate on for Israel, or is it something deeper and more discreet than that?
So I'll say that I don't support Iran or Israel, but I support Canada. And my view is, if the International Criminal Court and the UN is coming in and is trying to strip Israel of their sovereign right to decide when to defend themselves, then unfortunately I support Israel.
Oh,
Not that I hate the country, but I don't like to get involved in these conflicts.
mm-hmm.
With respect to Iran, I don't know what's wrong with that country. Like that regime it's a lunatic regime.
Mm,
Um, they're By the way, their funding for all this terrorism, it comes from oil sales, and those oil sales, that's the people's treasure. So what they're doing, if you talk to Iranians on the ground, they say, can you please convince America to drop a rocket somewhere in Iran? They could hit a sand dune, it doesn't matter. Just scare this regime to stop funding Hezbollah and to stop funding Hamas, and to give that money back to us.
mm-hmm.
So I don't really know why they're doing it beyond maybe comparing it to like the CCP, or maybe even I wouldn't even compare it to Russia. Like the CCP is an evil transnational criminal organization that's hell bent on gaining more power, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the only way I can think of the regime in Iran doing these things to destabilize the region when they're playing with fire because Israel has nukes.
Mm-hmm. A related question I have for you concerns Canadian universities. You, like myself, are a product of Canadian universities. These are the hallowed halls of Canadian academia that have produced people like you, and doctors and lawyers and nurses and teachers. And until recently, they've been respected halls of learning, but now they seem to be the focal point of political activism that has the flavor of NGOs, of people outside the country, causing this. When I look at what's going on at Columbia University and places like McGill, I can't help but notice that they all have the same tents, and that the signs look very similar to the ones that were used during the BLM riots. So, what's your take on what's going on at universities in North America right now with the pro-Palestinian sort of encampments taking over these campuses?
I think it's a confluence of so many different things. So, on the one hand, universities have always been unhinged in the sense that, like, the kids that are there are typically not the ones that are paying their own tuition.
Right.
So they start doing stupid things, and I can't remember the names, but this has happened a lot in U.S. history at different universities where they've
Hmm.
had sit-ins. I remember when I was at York University, I was a student. I'm left of center, socialist lunatic I was at the time. So you adopt an anti-Israel posture, and I'd like to stress this is not because you hate Jews. I mean, you get Noam Chomsky coming on campus, and as long as he takes an anti-Israeli stance, you're like,
Right.
oh wow, this guy's on our side. Same with Norman Finkelstein.
Hmm.
So that's one thing. These kids aren't paying their own tuition, and then you add this is throwing like gasoline on a dumpster fire, which you mentioned these NGOs. So they're wholly ungodly. They're coming in and they're meddling in affairs that they shouldn't do. Many of the times they're using taxpayer money, or you get someone like George Soros. So that's another problem. In addition to that, you have a third problem is that these universities, they're losing public support. Like if they're pushing
Hmm.
racism, if they're pushing, you know, maybe not transgenderism for children, but like if they're pursuing these socialist agendas that we don't agree with, well, I'm less likely to stand up for that university when protesters take it over. That you got to do a cost benefit analysis because they're attacking people based on their religion. That's an issue.
Hmm.
And then a fourth problem, I'm gonna invoke the party argument here, where I think a lot of these problems would evaporate if we privatize these institutions. I
Amen.
know,
Yes.
yeah, I know that's like I'm labeling myself a heretic in Canada by using the P word, but if we had private universities, they would have private security, and if we had castle doctrine, I'm not saying shoot the students, but you can go up to
Right.
them, you can detain them, you
Hmm.
can identify them, the ones that are students, you can expel them, and the ones that are not, hand them to the police. And if we had a judicial system that wasn't completely captured, then they would prosecute them or pursue that in court.
Hmm.
That's a lot of ifs, but I'll stop right there.
Yeah. Well, I noticed that in New York, in New York at Columbia, that the police are actually going in or are breaking up these encampments. I doubt that that's going to happen in Canada at places like McGill and UBC. I'm curious to know, though, it's been said that anti-Semitism is something of a bellwether, that perhaps something is rotten in the state of Denmark. In other words, that perhaps the social fabric of a country is coming apart. What's the central role of anti-Semitism in all of this? What are your thoughts on that?
So I don't know the history that well to take it back. Like maybe, I mean, it's my understanding that anti-Semitism comes from Christianity and the rift between the two, and obviously it exploded in Nazi Germany. So I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I have a feeling that this is not about the fact that they're Jewish.
Right.
Um, if tomorrow Israel came out and said we're disbanding the IDF, we're going to have a two-state solution, we're going to lean into climate change, and we're going to change our flag to the trans flag, I think like anti-Semitism would just evaporate instantly.
Yeah.
Um, I will also add that all of these things, they all fall under the umbrella of prejudice. So what you're seeing right now is there's a massive push in the media and in government to go after the elderly. They're
Hmm.
calling them boomers, and they're saying, oh, the reason the property value is so high is because they bought these lands a long time ago. So we should increase taxes to bankrupt essentially these people and take away their ability to live because this is what they were hoping on to retire. That's another form of prejudice. The assault on white people, again, another form of prejudice. Like it's not. Somebody better than me will probably say, "Peyman, it's Marxism." But my point is, I think we have a bigger, deeper problem.
I agree. And part of the response to this on the right seems to be a movement towards Christianity. For example, Tucker Carlson recently has come out and has basically pronounced that he thinks that what we're really battling here is not left versus right. It's not politics. It's religious, and it's principalities and powers. We're actually battling evil. Russell Brand has come out on his podcast, and apparently he was recently baptized in the Thames and was reciting the Rosary on his podcast. Jordan Peterson, his wife, recently converted to Christianity. Do you see a connection here in terms of the somewhat public revival of Christianity in the West? Do you see a connection there between the rise of for example, anti-Semitism on the left and also atheism?
Yeah, so let me go back a little bit. I was born in Iran, so I guess as per Islamic law, I was born Muslim, and then after the religious clergy destroyed the country, our family just became wholly secular, and I've pretty much been
Hmm.
secular and atheist all my life.
Hmm.
And then until 2020, and I'm going to these protests, I I swear to God, about 95% of these protests came from Christians.
Yeah.
And so there's something there that's it's almost entirely the Christian movement that's stepping up and trying to save the country.
Hmm.
And I agree with you. Tucker's been vocal on this, but Russell Brand, I think I really like his view, and he's basically he tied it back to the land.
Mm,
Um,
interesting.
like he said, we've lost touch with the land. Like we don't know what he meant was we don't know where the food comes from. Like we
Mhm.
don't understand this concept of property rights. And I can't help but feel that Christianity is somehow related to that, because you can't separate Christianity in the West and this whole concept of classical liberalism, or the right for property rights and things.
Fascinating. So let's tie that into some of the policies that you support as a PPC candidate. And just to confirm, it is your intention to run as a candidate for the PPC in the next federal election, correct?
Yeah, unless they kick me out for my views being too extreme.
Well,
Oh.
let's hope they don't, because I certainly, if I were in your writing, I would certainly vote for you. One of them that's very, very topical right now in Canada and is inflation. And you state on your website you believe that money is the measuring tape for value, and inflation constantly distorts that tape. So what do you mean by that, and what is your policy in terms of inflation?
So I actually stole that from Vivek Ramaswamy, and he's got a good point. Like inflation, so you got a measuring tape that's for the physical world. Like you measure how many centimeters it is. That tape can't be made out of gum or silly putty. Otherwise, like no architectural building would work. And it's sort of the same thing with finance, business, life. You can't measure it based on length, width, or height, but you can measure a value of something using money.
Hmm.
Traditionally, that has been gold, but now it's been switched with the US dollar.
Right.
Um, and like obviously, since I think it was 1971, Bretton Woods got ripped up and they started floating their currency. We started getting more inflation, but things have gotten out of control in the last few years. And I want to tie this back to Iran. The number one complaint I get from my friends in Iran when I talk to them is there's no certainty. So if they buy a car today, and they want to flip it, they buy it for 10,000 today. Tomorrow it might be 75,000. It might be $3.
Hmm.
There's no certainty in the fundamental underlying issue, transaction unit, which is money.
Hmm.
And that's happening here too. And what's happening is people want to hedge. They want to hedge inflation. They can go buy property. It drives up the price of property. That's a problem. You can go buy gold. Gold is not a really good hedge on inflation. You can go buy crypto. That's got its own issues. So people I think they're dumping their money either in property or in the stock market. When instead money should just be a medium for people living their lives rather than living in fear.
Hmm. It's funny you talk about hedging. A friend of mine is one of the top hedge fund managers in Western Canada. He was telling me recently that another thing that's being hedged are carbon credits, and in fact, that the carbon tax is a driver of these carbon credits, and that there's basically speculation in them, and that many billions of dollars are being made off the back of carbon taxes, which of course are directly related to a rise in inflation. But very wealthy people who can afford to do so are actually speculating on this carbon tax market. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah, they vaguely familiar. So the former or current presidential candidate, Dr. Shiva, he's got a good video up on BitChute about this. But it's my understanding that the carbon credits, they're going to be mediated by the UN. So you purchase these credits based on how much carbon you produce. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so.
And you have charlatans like Al Gore that are going up and they're buying this. So it's a huge conflict of interest because he's hoarded all these carbon credits. Now he's pushing policy to make himself rich. takes me back to something Bruce Party said. Like the problem is not these things are a problem. Like Al Gore purchasing these carbon credits, the carbon credits, this is all a problem. But it wouldn't be a problem if we had limited government. Like we're
Right.
giving government the power to regulate these things, and almost all across the board, every time a government gets involved, they just end up messing things up. And this is a
Hmm.
perfect example.
Yeah, they're very good at that. They've also made a mess of education, and this is another thing that you talk about on your website, how the PPC policy and your policy in education calls for important changes. You say that the transfer of decision making of educational curricula from the community, from families to the provincial government, is an abdication of parental responsibility. What do you mean by that? And what changes would you make if you were a member of parliament to our educational system?
So I compare it to like we have this habit in Canada where if something happens, you call the police.
Yeah,
Well, if the house blows up or if somebody's firing a gun in your neighborhood, that makes sense. You call in the experts. But if somebody is assaulting your wife physically or verbally, you're not supposed to wait for the police. You're supposed to, beat the guy up. But you
sure.
you can't do that now because that's considered assault and they'll send you to jail and there's so much societal pressure to call the police. They're like
Hmm.
our Ghostbusters. That's what I
Hmm.
mean when I say abdication of responsibility. So when you
Right.
transfer responsibility to the police, you've abdicated your responsibility. When you transfer responsibility to the government, local government, then provincial government, as a parent, for the education system, that's an abdication of responsibility. We can't then turn around and be like, why are they teaching this filth in school? I don't understand. Well, we have let power drift from the municipalities. When you lived in a city and you could deal with the school board, you dealt with the principal, you could tell them, like, we don't want this. And the principal would
Hmm.
listen. When that power drifts to the provincial legislature, it's a lot harder. The problems are going farther and farther away from your immediate community. And the reason I said that is there was a protest in Vancouver. I forget the gentleman's name, but he's running as an independent for provincial office, and they were attacking the content of what they were teaching in school. And I'm like, you're going about it the wrong way. The problem is that we're allowing them to tax us. The money goes to the provincial government, and then we have to claw it back with conditions. Like
Yeah.
that's where you have to start reforming the system.
Yeah, and this is central to the PPC platform, isn't it? The grassroots engagement with our communities, and thereby to politics. And just as an aside, a little anecdote: I was at a talk recently, and there's a gentleman named David Parker who heads up something called Take Back Alberta in our province. And he was speaking in front of a group of people, and he said, show of hands, how many of you object to the types of books that are in our school libraries? And all the hands went up. And then he asked, okay, now show of hands, how many of you are serving on a school library board? No hands went up. And this is kind of the essential problem, isn't it? That I mean, in Canada, we're fortunate in that we do have a country where it is still possible to engage with our communities and become involved in quote unquote politics, at least the ones that are closest to our door, and perhaps even into federal and provincial politics. Well, you're doing it, aren't you? But not enough of us are doing it, and not enough of us are doing it for the right reasons. And we don't have enough people like you there to crowd out all the people who want to come in and really do all the bad stuff. That's part of the problem. That's part of the platform that the PPC advocates, isn't it?
Yes, and David Parker, he's really a saint. Like what he did to save Alberta. So I'm
Hmm.
hoping to do 1% of that. But he is absolutely right, and it ties back to what you asked about Christianity and the revival of Christianity. What's happened is we've destroyed the family unit. We've destroyed the concept of community, which community faith, sort of the same thing, and we're living a consumption based lifestyle. So I don't know if I'm very much a product of the big urban centers. I grew up in Vancouver, so I know how things work there. So you go in there, and feminism has told women they have to go get a career, and society's told men, just go out, get drunk, and hook up. So that is a consumption based lifestyle because you're not
Right.
investing anything, you're not earning money. And
Hmm.
any benefits that come out from these high paying jobs in these cities, they just go right back into nightclubs, expensive restaurants. So it's a big problem. And what I've noticed this because I've been following the quote unquote freedom movement.
Hmm.
They come on and they talk about whatever 15-minute cities or whatever their core competency is, and then they turn to the people and they say, all right guys, it's time to get involved. But people look at the problem and they're like, this is larger than life, I don't know where to get involved. So
Hmm.
we almost have to hold their hand. And I that's my goal. I'm going to be starting a virtual town hall Zoom meeting weekly. But I
Oh,
think what we have to start
great.
telling people is, one really easy place to start is go on your town hall city council website, figure out what the city council meeting is going to be talking about, read it. It's going to be a 100-page PDF, but read it, and then go to every single meeting and just listen or ask a question. That's how you blossom into becoming a politician. And I think,
Hmm.
yes, I'm running for the PPC, and we're going to do good things, but I think the only way we can take back our country is to use a term they employ against them, a whole of society approach. I think
Right.
we have to rush all of these offices.
Hmm. Hmm. Another problem that seems to be too big to handle and almost insurmountable is healthcare, and this is particularly controversial in British Columbia because of Bill 36 there. You want to talk about what your party's policy is on healthcare and how it's different from say the Liberals or the CPC?
I haven't looked at the platform in a while. I believe Max's position is a healthcare credit system.
Yes, yes. And you're
Um,
basically saying what I understanding is he says it's not healthcare, it's sick care, and that there's so much waste on bureaucracy, wasting so much money on bureaucracy. Canada has my understanding is that we have one of the highest healthcare. We might be number one in terms of healthcare expenditure per capita, but we have some of the lowest outcomes in the G20. And my understanding, correct me if this is wrong, is that what Max is advocating is a more responsible fiscal approach to healthcare to solve those problems, get rid of the wastage, so that more money is actually going to healthcare and less money is being wasted on things like administration. Does that sound about right?
yeah, it does sound right, and I 100% agree with him on this. Um, bring so one of the problems is that we're a federal party, and to me, the mere existence of Health Canada is violation of our constitution.
I
so,
quite agree. Yeah, it is
so
a yeah, quite agree.
we're trying to do two things, right? Like we're
No.
trying to come in and fix healthcare, but in order to fix healthcare, you got to go through Health Canada, and if you go through that, it's like you're violating everything you stand for. But putting that aside, if we look at BC for the moment, and I hope I don't get the numbers wrong, in 2020, the BC province gave $100 million to the BC Nurses Union, and they said they wanted to have something called uh, they wanted to increase the ratio of
Hmm.
nurses
Hmm.
to patients. I don't understand why you're the legislature, you're sovereign. I don't understand we have to go through a nurses union, but they did that 100 million in 2020. And then 2021 was like 150, 2022, 200, 250, 300, and they want to, I think, keep it at 300 for the next couple of years going forward. So there's a very brave woman in British Columbia called Corinne Maury, and she's running for provincial office. And she's looking into this right now. And what she's finding is exactly what you said, Leighton. A lot of this money, a lot of this increase is going to bureaucracy, because
Hmm.
the number and what she found is the number of staff is increasing, the amount of money is increasing, but the number of hours that nurses have to work is not decreasing, it's actually
Hmm.
increasing. So
Hmm.
she believes that it's going towards the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
That's one of the problems. And again, heresy here, but if you really want to solve this problem, privatize it. If you want to
Yeah.
have a safety net, that's fine. Even if you want to have a full-on welfare system, for the love of all that is holy, don't have a single payer model.
Yes. And well, and this the problem is being compounded a couple of ways in British Columbia. One is obviously mass immigration, because our federal immigration minister has declared Canada unilaterally an open society with open borders. That's one serious problem. The other is that in British Columbia, uh, the province is still imposing a vaccine mandate on healthcare workers, which really is quite incredible when you consider. I mean, it's no secret that that these drugs are dangerous to the point that many jurisdictions have banned them. But the BC government seems intent upon vaccinating everybody against their will as a precondition to them working in the healthcare system, which is driving very necessary healthcare workers right out of the province. And that type of bureaucracy is sort of endemic of the problem, isn't it?
It is, but I wouldn't call it bureaucracy. I'd call it clown world. Like you, yeah. By my last
Maybe they're
count,
synonymous.
yeah. There's definitely a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
Um, last count, 6,000 terminated nurses because they were unvaccinated. Um, that that money that was supposed to go to the BC Nurses Union, $100 million I referred to,
Mm-hmm.
part of that was going towards hiring foreign nurses. So
Mm-hmm.
you fire 6,000 of your own people, and you want to bring people from abroad to plug that gap. And you're using taxpayer money to do it. Like it's this. I swear, this is clown world. Bill
Mm-hmm.
36 you mentioned earlier made it. That made it a lot worse because now we don't have doctor-patient confidentiality, and they've codified vaccine mandates, so it's kind of strengthened it. That's another layer of insanity. And then you mentioned the COVID vaccines. Like I've been doing a lot of soul searching, and if we're going to go down this road as a society, all right, fine. You want to legalize all drugs? All right, more power to you. You want to legalize, decriminalize dangerous vaccines? Fine, go take 50 boosters a day. Don't do it on the government dime. Don't force me to take it. That's a violation of the security of my person. Don't fire nurses for refusing to take it. Like I don't know what's going on, Leighton. I don't know if this is Klaus Schwab and he's got a series of levers and he pulls it and everybody falls in line, or people have just lost their mind, or maybe we insulted the bureaucracy by daring to challenge them, and now they're mule-headedly moving forward with their policies. I don't know. I can't get into their headspace.
Yeah, there are a couple of federal bills actually that are making their way through the House right now that are rather frightening, and that would tie eligibility for things like Canada Pension Plan and employment insurance to vaccination status. So it's not just British Columbia. This is really going on throughout the country, and seems to be part of a broader agenda. But the healthcare problem, the healthcare crisis, is tied to something else that we were talking about earlier, which is immigration. And my understanding is the PPC has a different policy on immigration than the CPC or the Liberals, quite different actually. Do you want to talk about this? It's again ties into sort of a common sense approach. I doubt that being the person who you are, you're against immigration. I don't know any sensible person who is. Canada is a nation of immigrants. We need immigrants. But the policy of the PPC is more of a common sense approach to immigration. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I haven't looked at the platform, but by last reading, they're recommending between 100,000 and 350,000 immigrants per year. So right now we're anywhere between 1.2 and 3 million, depending on how our prime minister is lying that time of the day.
How many foreign students are in the country? Yeah.
Yeah, like how are they counting it? Who knows? Are they counting it? So it's drastically lower. Supporters of the PPC will point to that and say, this is why I support the PPC. Critics of the PPC on the more extreme side will say that's a Chamber of Commerce approach, and some people want a full moratorium on immigration. My whole purpose in running and my aim through my campaign is to educate people and to say, all right, like what is immigration? So either immigration, you could take like a Chamber of Commerce sort of view where you're saying, listen, if we need labor, we have a free market economy. So I'm in British Columbia, I'm in Whistler right now. There's a massive resort here. They just can't get enough Canadians to staff this mountain and the village. So they're going out to now they're bringing labor in from Ireland. It just fits their business model.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I don't really have a problem with that, and I think we shouldn't curb that. I don't think a federal government should come in and say no more immigration. But at the same time, there's another model. If you want to approach it, you could take the model that the UAE, the Gulf Emirates, takes. Anybody can come in. It's very easy to come in. You'll never get citizenship. So the reason I mention that, I'm not saying we shouldn't give citizenship, but we need to start being honest with ourselves. A big problem with immigration is it's exacerbated when you have social services. Like, it takes decades to build and fund and grow these high schools. Same thing with hospitals. So it takes a decade to build this hospital and staff it and pay it and train people. It only takes 1 year for Trudeau to sign a bill and bring 2 million people in. Like, that's a reality. It doesn't matter if the people coming in are black, white, purple, whatever in between. That's one thing we're not talking about. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, do we want to be a country where we just let everybody in for business purposes? Or do we want to be a country that welcomes people in as Canadians, in which case we have to drastically reduce the number, and because we can't afford this.
And be more selective about them. And these have downstream implications. For example, in Calgary, the mayor and city council just passed a bylaw that would permit persons who are not citizens to vote in municipal elections. And of course, this sort of confirms a conspiracy theory about voter replacement that has been out there for a long time. And it's also tied into some of the agendas that are being espoused by supranational organizations like the WEF and the UN. What's your view on these? I saw on your website, it's your view that these organizations have done more harm than good, and that we must begin to extricate ourselves from them. Why is it that you hold that view?
Well, before getting to the WEF and UN, so in your great province, you have a wonderful city called Chestermere, and Chestermere had a mayor, Jeff Colvin,
Right.
and he uncovered a lot of corruption that led directly to one of your cabinet ministers, Rick McIver, and Rick McIver just came in and sacked him and just removed him.
Yeah.
A few days ago, Calgary votes to let non-citizens have voting rights, and Rick McIver swoops in like this superhero to save the day. He's like, not on my watch. So you have, I don't know, to me, they're all guilty of sin, but sometimes they can get on our side. So Rick McIver has stopped that, the ability to vote for non-citizens. As for the WEF and the UN, I mean, the WEF is just, I don't see, nobody voted for this. I don't see, it's a billionaires club, and they're putting out just the most ridiculous ideas. Like, you will eat bugs. Klaus Schwab, he's come out, his famous villain catchphrase, you will own nothing and be happy. As much as I hate that guy, I can't really disagree with him, because that's the direction that people are going in.
Yes.
With no property rights. So, and also his other guy, I can't pronounce his name, Haval Urari or something.
Yes.
I think he's probably the number one person you hate, because he's the opposite of a Christian. He
wants to depopulate the earth.
Well, he wants to depopulate the earth, and I think I mentioned this to you before. He's laying the groundwork for undermining anytime somebody on our side says, that I have a right to property, I have a right to my children. He came out and he said, rights don't exist. Like, they were created by man. Like, I get that. Like, perception is reality. We've built a society, but over the years, we've come up and we've understood these things called rights. But yeah, I hate that guy. He's a greaseball. The United Nations, like, it was, I think it was cancer from the moment it was created, but it was created in the ashes of the Second World War. And I think the liberal mind kind of got a hold of it, and they made a very, very basic and incorrect observation. They said, if Hitler was racist, and if nationalism is what caused the Second World War, then the opposite of that, the destruction of nationalism, will make sure that we don't ever have any wars. And they've kind of been pursuing that. On the outwardly face of it, they say, we're here to prevent another Second World War, humanitarian crises. But I think they're trying to get rid of national sovereignty, because they believe in their heart, if we get rid of borders, and if we take, if we have 10 white people here and 10 brown people here, if we do 5 and 5, then we'll bring about utopia. It's Marxist, it's communist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. My issue with those organizations is largely because of their allegiance to this failed ideology, which Winston Churchill described as perfect equality. We all starve together. But what is the problem with socialism, apart from the fact that in its application in the 20th century, it killed about 100 million people? But why is socialism it's so bad for Canada? Because again, this is another part of the PPC platform that socialism, and we're being force fed a steady diet of it by the current Liberal government and indeed by many of our provincial governments. But why is this so bad for Canada?
That's a really it's I'm not just trying to impress you, but that is a really good question. And um, what happens is on our side, we tend to say this a lot. Oh, it killed 100 million people. So many people died. It's never worked. All of these arguments, they just bounce off these proponents of socialism. They have a response for it, and at the end of the day, they don't care. My view is that the reason that socialism doesn't work is you could think of like every human being has a spark. We call it a soul, but it's like a flame.
Mm-hmm.
We yearn to be free. We all men. I can't speak for women, but men, we want to be producers. When the trucker convoy happened, one of the reasons it fell apart is because everybody wanted to do their own thing. Everybody wanted to be the one that saves Canada.
Right.
Well, yes, that's bad, but it shows that like we want to be contributors to society. Socialism suffocates that flame. I think that's the ultimate problem, because it's the government coming in and you're just trying to sell a lemonade. You get a lemonade stand, try to sell lemonades, and they're like, no, you got to measure the sugar this way, and your cup's got to be cleaned that way, and you got to give us money, and you're just, you know what, screw it. I'm just going to go on welfare.
Mm-hmm.
That's my problem with socialism.
Yeah, and another part of the problem is it really does lead to disintegration, social disintegration. We really cannot be. It seems that wherever socialism or Marxism takes root, you have a very divided populace, and part of the problem with that is destruction of some of our shared values. And you talked about some of them, individual rights and property rights. And part of the problem with the destruction of that, again, is when we go to our courts, what we're being met with is not a fair and impartial body. What we're being met with instead, what appears to be a very ideological people who have a certain political agenda. And this is being expressed in terms of something we call judicial activism. And I know you mentioned this on your website. You say, I believe that justice must be adjudicated by 12 men and women, not by elitist judges who bring their politics into the courtroom with them. I quite agree with that. But you want to talk about that a little bit and why you think that is a really serious problem in our country?
Yeah, I mean, I can approach it from two angles. So from the high level, which I've never been, I wasn't in the court, but a lot of these times with like the provinces versus the carbon tax ruling, that'd be a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Or the one that legalized medical assistance in dying here in BC. Like, no, this isn't the role of the court. We don't appoint these judges so that they can shape society into what vision they have for it. You know, we say that, you know, murder is a sin. Like, okay, did Peyman Askari hold the gun when he fired, or did he intend to fire? Like that's what they're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
But instead they're coming in. They're like, does Peyman Askari have a charter right to do what he did? And then they look at the charter and they just interpret it any way they want. That, like, the famous expression is from Roe v. Wade in the U.S. when they said, you know, this right to privacy is in the penumbra of the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, wait a minute, what are you? Who appointed this lunatic judge? On the other end, like I'll be honest, like I've never actually gone into court, but there's a perception from the bottom level where government is just doing whatever it wants, and the people are powerless. Like most average people just don't have the energy to take this stuff to court.
Mm-hmm.
But every day there's another regulation. Like I just found out in British Columbia, there is a rule that all burgers have to be well done. I asked the server, I was like, can you please make sure my burger's well done? She's like, oh, you must not be from BC, because legally we're obligated to do that. So that's like another regulation. But citizens feel that if they took that to court, the judge is going to be like, well, if the government did it, it's the will of the government. So get lost.
Mm-hmm. Incredible. Well, in this context, how confident are you that our courts will uphold our cherished freedoms, like freedom of expression, in the face of new laws like Bill C-63, which is going to make criminal conversations like the one we've been having here today? Do you have any confidence in that, or do you think that in fact the courts will actually uphold the government's position that any speech which has the potential to offend, in fact, any thought before it gets to the point of speech that has the potential to offend is criminal, or do you think that that there's breath and life yet in Section 2 of the Charter?
So I'm gonna share my opinion, which might not be popular, but I think our charter is just a poorly written document. Like, I think it's written in such a way that there's so many loopholes, and you can take any off ramp you want, that it's very difficult to fault the court for some of the decisions they
I
reach.
think it
So
was
they,
deliberately written that way, actually, Kim. I think it was deliberately vague in the way that it's written. And if people don't believe me, they should take our Charter of Rights and compare it to the American Bill of Rights, and you'll instantly see the difference.
I actually agree with you, and I would extend that to also the BNA Act. I know that was written a long time ago, but that thing is a mess. So you look at the U.S. Constitution; it's way clearer.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, you could give the judges some wiggle room if they say, listen, technically speaking, you can make the argument that this Bill 63 is constitutional. On the other hand, I'm a big advocate of the concept of parliamentary supremacy, which means garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
And if we Canadians are so reckless and so irresponsible and so stupid that we're voting in these lunatics that are pushing through these lunatic bills, we can't then turn around and fault the courts when they
Mhm.
don't fix the mess that we helped create.
It's an
Um,
interesting perspective. I have not heard that before, but you're so right. You're so right.
it came to
Um,
me after the sorry if I could just be
Go
permitted to
ahead. Go
continue, but
ahead.
it came to me after the Toronto police said, leave your keys out so the thieves can steal your car.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
on the face of it, that's a stupid thing to say. But the police, like, their job is to minimize, death and damage to people. So they're looking around. They're like, well, something has caused all of this spike in car robberies. It's not the RCMP or the Toronto Police that did this, and we don't have the resources to deal with this. So we're just going to recommend that you put it outside your front door so you don't get like stabbed. Uh, so it seems stupid at first, but at the end of the day, the police are not there to fix all of the problems in society. That's our responsibility.
And again, coming back to the concept that's within the PPC platform, and that is individual responsibility, shared and community responsibility, and limited government, which entails less reliance and dependence upon government. Because one of the problems is when we have a society which is dependent upon government, it simply invites the government to grow exponentially to the point where the old saying applies that where government is big, the individual is small, and vice versa. And what you're saying and what the PPC is saying is that we want to live in a society where the individual is respected and has the ability to self-determine. And the only way to do that is to construct a society in which the power of government is limited. So I quite agree with that approach, and I agree with much of what you've had to say here during our conversation. Very grateful that you've taken the time to be with us. I want to close off now with something we call the reading list. So I'm going to go first. I've got a couple of selections, and then maybe you could think about one or two, not necessarily a book. It can be a book or a website or some resource that you think you would recommend to our viewers and listeners that would enhance their understanding of some of the topics that are important to you and that we've been talking about today. So the first book that I'm going to add to our reading list is one of many books that are written by Dr. Thomas Sowell. I like to joke that he's written more books after the age of 80 than most people have read. I think he's 94 now. But this one is called Discrimination and Disparities. And the summary of it is that economic and other outcomes differ vastly among individuals, groups, and nations. Many explanations have been offered for the differences. Some believe that those with less fortunate outcomes are victims of genetics. Others believe that those who are less fortunate are victims of the more fortunate. What this book talks about is that it gathers a wide array of empirical evidence, as Dr. Soul always does, to challenge the idea that different economic outcomes can be explained by any one factor, for example, racism. And this could apply to discrimination, exploitation, or genetics. And so this revised and enlarged edition of this book also analyzes the human consequences of the prevailing social vision of these disparities, in other words, diversity, inclusion, equity, and the policies based on that vision, from educational disasters to widespread crime and violence, which we are seeing in Canada. The other book is from the late Roger Scruton. This one is called Conservatism, Ideas in Profile. We use this word conservatism, but I find that many people who use the word don't quite understand what it means. And Dr. Scruton, to my mind, is one of the best, certainly the best modern author to explain what we actually mean by that. The way he does it is he looks at the central ideas of conservatism over the centuries, and he examines conservative thinking on civil society, the rule of law, and the role of the state on the one hand, and freedom, including freedom of expression and association, morality, equality, property, and rights on the other. And he traces the origins and development of the conservative ideology in the philosophies and thoughts of, among others, John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, David Hume, Edmund Burke, Adam Smith, John Stuart Mill, John Ruskin, Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman, and others. And he shows how these ideas have worked out in the politics and policies of leading figures, people such as Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Disraeli, the Earl of Salisbury, Calvin Coolidge, Winston Churchill, Ronald Reagan, and Margaret Thatcher. And he also looks closely at the degree to which capitalism and free markets have been and are integral to conservative ideology and politics in the West. His clear, incisive guide in this book is essential reading for anyone wishing to understand the politics and policies of the West now and over the last 3 centuries. So those are my 2 selections. And with that, I'll turn it over to our guest for his closing comments.
I didn't listen to a single thing you said. I was just thinking about books. So I guess the first book I read one recently. It's called The Storm Before the Storm.
Oh,
and have you read this, Leighton?
No, and I'm always excited when our guests come up with books that are not yet on our reading list, and you've done that. So congratulations with that one. You get to move on to the bonus round. What's that book about?
It is amazing. This guy went and looked at the Roman Republic. And he said before, like 150 years before the Roman Empire, and he said, guys, this isn't like Caesar came in and there was a civil war and it stopped the Republic. He goes, 150 years, the rot had started. So when the Roman Republic transitioned from, land owning farmers to all the land being centralized in the Senate, and then that divide in society caused people to abandon traditions surrounding politics, and it got increasingly more and more violent.
Wow, this is sounding vaguely familiar.
yeah, it didn't end well. So, but hopefully our story will end differently. Mm-hmm. So, Storm Before the Storm, that's a good one. If you go on the Mises Institute, there's a free book by hope I pronounced his name right, Murray Rothbard.
I think
it's Progressivism in Canada, in America.
Yeah,
and it is eye-opening because I always thought that everything went to hell after the Federal Reserve and Woodrow Wilson. And he's saying, no, it was the 1860s. Corporations started coming in through the robber barons. And then the 1880s, corporations in the oil lobby. And then whenever it was 1890s with Theodore Roosevelt, he goes, that's when progressivism took off. So everything that we're dealing with right now with the administrative state, it's been like 140 years in the making.
Wow, that's discouraging, but very. It's a revelation. But hopefully we can at least understanding what the problems are, we can try to change them. And you have another one as well.
I'll give you a third one, and this one's specifically for you, Leighton. There's a video game I used to play in the 90s. It was called the Neighborhood Chronicles, and part of that is you got to walk past this wall, 40 wall sections, and there's text written on it, and you read it. The game was developed by 2 philosophers who wanted to give a philosophical spin on religion.
Really?
and you can find it online. It's called the Neighborhood Chronicles: The Wall of Records, and it's really beautiful. It's about prejudice. It's about overcoming adversity, and how the son is flawed compared to the father. So I think you'll like that.
Brilliant. Wow. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for being our guest here today on Gray Matter. We appreciate so much you taking the time and also all the work that you're doing. Your podcast is just brilliant. It's called In Lay Terms, folks. Please check it out. I think you're going to be hearing a lot more about Peyman Askari going forward. And I certainly hope that at some point he is in Parliament and that he has given a high-ranking portfolio, perhaps a finance minister or something along those lines. But we're so grateful for you having been here and spent this time with us, and thanks for being our special guest here today on Gray Matter.
Thank you so much, Leighton, for having me on. You're doing God's work.